Welcome to the Dave Shove Midstream Reading Series. My name is Richard Terrill. If you're a first-time visitor to our readings and you want to be on our mailing list to get the Zoom invitation to the readings, check out our website, which is midstreamreadingseries.wordpress.com. The readings take place monthly, almost always on the second Thursday of the month. And on the website, you can also find links to YouTube recordings of past readings from the last few years. And before we go any further, I want to thank Paul Matties, who's running tech for us again tonight, who set up all of this and who also takes care of the website. Believe me, without Paul, we would definitely not be here. We would have gone down with COVID, so thanks, Paul. And I'll remind you, while I can't tell you to buy books at our book table the way I would if we were meeting face-to-face on Lake Street, and I'm not going to give you the contact information for all tonight's poets, but you know how to find them online. So buy books and buy these books. And I was thinking I own most of them, I think, by the readers this evening. So I'm going to exercise my privilege to read one poem of my own before we get on to the featured readers. And this is a bookish crowd, I know, and I'm sure that, like me, you have these books on your bookshelf that you bought years ago and that you never read, but you don't get rid of them. And so this poem is about that. My unread books. I shelve them alphabetically. Larkin, Neighbors, Kerouac, neither would approve. Nabokov keeps a class-based distance from Patchen. Mike Royko cheek to cheek with Adrian Rich. Some choices speak to old habits and curiosities, that doorstep volume on Mao's Long March. The guidebook to local bike trails now peddled freely online. The unknown Henry Miller remains so, running the Amazon on empty as it turns out. That poet from Iraq, the defunct literary journal with all the great pictures in it. And the story collection from that woman at the writers' colony who flirted at dinner with everyone and with me, and finally announced at cocktails one evening that she missed her surgeon husband and left for home mid-residency after her New York agent called, but before I finished my crown of sonnets. Good luck with your new novel, she inscribed mistakenly on her title page. The way that phrase can mean, hey, good luck with that. These titles will still live here when I'm gone, too good for the library book sale. It's like the way we never get around to cleaning the garage. Maybe something out there we can use. Or like the way we tell ourselves we'll reread those old letters in cardboard boxes under the basement steps and throw out which ones? Those from friends no longer living or those from friends who still are? A dilemma that in time will take care of itself. I'm a gardener, slow to turn the soil after a killing frost. I vow, if not to read, at least to look at all the words, learn the lessons of what's lacking in these books, but also in me, the why of my own incompletion, shelved and random as I feel most days. Page numbers missing, meaning obscured, my table of lack of contents. This could be anyone's story, I suppose. What made us not buy into the plot of our lives? Too many holes in it to be convincing. What never happened? What did but shouldn't have? Motivations unclear. Too many minor characters to keep straight. It's the one story I'm trying hardest to get through before the writer reveals what I suspected all along the ending would be. And good luck with that. Our first reader is Steve Healey. Steve Healey is the author of 3 books of poetry, all published by Coffee House Press: Earthling, 10 Mississippi, and most recently, Safe Houses I Have Known, which was a finalist for both the Believer Book Award and the Minnesota Book Award. His poems have appeared in magazines such as American Poetry Review, Fence, and The Nation, along with various anthologies, including The New Census, an anthology of contemporary American poetry. He teaches English and creative writing at Minneapolis College. Steve Healey.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. I love this. It's instead of the click. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And thank you, Richard, for inviting me to read. Thank you, Midstream Reading Series, and everyone involved for everything you do for our literary community. It's such a great service. I'm going to do a quick reading from this book. This is my 3rd book of poetry. It's called Safe Houses I Have Known. And I love this cover. I didn't make it myself, but so I can say I love it. The book it came out in 2019. Do you remember 2019? This was pre-pandemic, and it came out in September, about 6 months before the pandemic hit. And so I'm grateful that it came out before the pandemic hit. You know, it had a nice run, and we had some in-person readings locally, and it got some nice attention. And I started planning some out-of-town readings. And just as they were about to begin, the pandemic hit, and they were all canceled. So all of that is to say that I'm so grateful for Zoom. I know many of you don't feel very grateful for Zoom right now, but I'm grateful that at least I can use it to reach out to some out-of-town folks. And I think some of those folks have tuned in tonight. So I want to say a special thanks to friends and family and good people from all over the country who have tuned in, including, I believe, my mother. So hi, Mom, to you. My mother lives in one of the coasts, and then I have some other parents on the other coast. So this book, Safe Houses I Have Known, it's built upon one central autobiographical fact of my life, which is that my father was a spy for the CIA. So his official title was case officer in the clandestine services. He handled spies. He got information that was deemed valuable for the US. He was in that position for over 30 years, from 1951 to 1983. So right in the heart of the Cold War. So this first poem tells the story of how I first found out about his professional life from him when he told me the story, or when he told me about that role he played. I was 12 years old in middle school, or what we called in where I grew up, junior high school. So this poem is called In Junior High School. In junior high school, in junior high school, I'll try that again. I sat in the classroom listening to the clock. I didn't say anything. I touched my lips too much. I listened to the wind rubbing against the windows. The field behind my school sometimes disappeared under snow. One night, my father told me that he was a spy for the CIA. He said that being a spy was like James Bond, but less exciting. He said I should never tell anyone he was a spy. If anyone asked, I should say he worked for the State Department. I listened to my father, but didn't say anything. I forgot I was there. It was dark outside. After that night, I went on being a student in junior high school. I sat in the classroom and didn't tell anyone my father was a spy for the CIA. I forgot there were windows between me and the field of snow. My history teacher showed us a bar graph of Soviet missiles. They were towering over the American missiles. He said, we were losing the Cold War. I looked outside. I could see footsteps in the field of snow. I didn't say anything. Thank you. So I make a James Bond reference in that poem. And that's one of the early references to sort of classic spy hero narratives. And I think one of the things the book tries to do is deflate and undermine that heroic spy story that we're all familiar with, the James Bond and all the rest of it, especially those from the late 20th century. So my father was a good person and he was a kind man, but his life was tragic in many ways. And I explore, that tragedy in many ways throughout the book. I think his professional life caused plenty of damage to his personal life, his family life. And so my parents went through a difficult divorce. My father struggled, especially late in life, with addiction and mental health problems. So the book explores some of that traumatic material, but I try to avoid just presenting myself as a victim and also try to hold myself accountable. I try to hold the CIA accountable for, a history of atrocities and to show how we all were complicit in that, that history, right? So it's certainly, being a white, middle-aged, now I'm middle-aged, being a white middle-class American kid growing up with a father who was a CIA spy certainly had its privileges. So this next poem tries to explore some of that territory and also how the CIA was doing great damage to lots of the lives of marginalized people around the world. So this poem is called I Can't Say This to You. And it kind of speaks to my father directly, sort of as if he came back from the grave and I were able to have a conversation with him. It makes reference to Vietnam in the late 60s. My family was stationed in Vienna, Austria during the late 60s. So it just happens that coincides with the height of the Vietnam War, which the CIA obviously had a huge role in. Also coincides with the moon landing. And so here we go. This is called I Can't Say This to You. I can't say this to you. Excuse me while I procrastinate a little more before beginning this poem to you, while I fold laundry, while a concealed camera moon watches me through the living room window, folding my elbows and knees into neat stacks of body, while eyeing the moon cookie, waiting on a plate for me to eat it. Or I watch the grainy televised summer of '69 moon landing. I don't remember watching as a one small step toddler, but you told me we watched while living in Vienna, where you were stationed as a CIA spy. You also told me I once snuck into the Vienna night in my pajamas while you walked our dog and had a smoke like dads did. I did try to follow you and of course spy on you, but I got lost and scared even if I could see above me that same moon until finally some nice police picked me up and I wouldn't speak even in English, much less German, but somehow they helped me get home and my little lost white American body was, of course, always safe while the planet kept rotating, while others we saw as others on the planet kept dying, while we kept not looking too closely, while the CIA was secretly killing thousands of others in Vietnam, while I slept in our house under a clear Vienna sky, and even years later, never really asked you what you knew or what you could say you knew to me or to yourself, or what knowing felt like, while the moon lit the edges of everyone who had a body. Thank you. So 2 poems down. Here's the third poem of 4. This one is called If You Are a Spy. And it also makes some reference to my father's spy life, including reference to his cover name, his alias, or the primary one that he used during his career. And I always thought it was kind of a funny, ridiculous name. So that shows up in the poem. It also sort of zooms out to make connections to the larger culture, and like some of the other poems in the book, to my present life, including my role as a parent. So this one is called If You Are a Spy. It also, just worth noting that it tries to use rhyming couplets, but they're very loose rhymes. I really got into traditional form in this book, or some of the poems use traditional form, villanelle and pantoum and haiku, and some rhyming couplets. But I especially like imperfect rhymes rather than perfect rhymes, sometimes known as slant. If you are a spy, it's possible to keep a secret, sneak a piece of candy every minute of the day. For example, keep a bag of M&Ms hidden nearby, or really listen to music like a cryptographer sucking blood from a mysterious word. My daughter's word for music is munits, if that's the way to spell it. She keeps she keeps saying it until I turn it on. My Bonnie lies over the ocean is another song that eludes me. I'm not used to the feel of salt water sloshing in my ears. It's true that when my father spied for the CIA, his cover name sounded fake. It was Victor T. Redvein. I just failed to keep that secret. There's no need to pretend a counter-revolution really came and my body still lies over the Bay of Pigs. It's hard to know if a threat is real. Inside the shell of my daughter's ear, a tick recently bit the soft skin. I tweezed the tick and put it in a jar as evidence, just in case we were watched from outer space. So last poem here, just a final word on that poem. My father's cover name was Victor T. Redvein, but I am going to out my mother as well. She actually worked for the CIA for a brief period. That's where my parents met, in Berlin, just after the wall went up in the early 60s. And my mother's cover name was equally funny, or weird, perhaps. And her cover name was Paula L. Spektorsky, not making that up. So I guess the CIA had a good imagination. Here's the last poem. It's called How About, and it also zooms out to make bigger connections to my present life. It occurred to me while writing this book that spying is like so many other things. And, you know, it has a lot in common, for example, with childhood imagination and art, right? Because they're both dealing with pretending and make-believe. So I started to think about my children's imaginative play as a kind of spying. And this poem is referencing, or it's titled How About, which is a reference to a phrase that they use often in imaginative play to trigger ideas. So they'll begin a sentence with "How about X?" or "How about Y?" So here we go. One final thing I want to say is thanks again to everyone for being here. This poem is called "How About." How about the house is haunted, but all the ghosts are nice ones, mostly nice, but sometimes mean when they eat our snacks without asking. How about there's a ghost horse with big snack lips, but she's nice and gives us slow gallop rides over furniture hills. All the ghosts are part of our family, but grown-ups can't see them. How about I'm the daughter, you're the son, or we're both half daughter, half son, half comet, half horse, going around the carousel. Over there is the black hole where we ate crackers and grapes today for snack. In that corner, all the galaxies that don't care if we don't say please and thank you. How about Dad never says we have to clean up this mess because he's our tiny, cute baby. He's always napping in his crib, or he's in the room where he writes poems, and inside him there's a baby who has another baby inside him. How about the babies have a war inside him and become orphans? Or how about we're the orphans in a poem Dad writes when then we're adopted by the ghost horse and off we ride through the snowy air. We say the words and disappear. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here.
That was Steve Healey. Janna Knittel lives in Minnesota, but still calls the Pacific Northwest home. Janna has published a chapbook, Fish and Wildlife, from Finishing Line Press, 2018, and has poems published or forthcoming in Between These Shores, Literary and Arts Annual, Blue Line, Cottonwood, Up North Lit, North Dakota Quarterly, Split Rock Review, Cold Mountain Review, Whale Road Review, The Wild Word, and Waters Deep, a Great Lakes Anthology. I think I see a theme running through those publications. Recognition includes 2021 and 2019 grants from the Minnesota State Arts Board. Janna Knittel.
Hello, everyone. I do not know why my video is not working. I promise I am not a Russian bot. This honestly is a totally new issue for me. I combed my hair and everything, so this is a great disappointment. I wanted to read mostly poems that I've never read before in public. And it turned out that several of those poems were poems that grew out of childhood memories that popped up. So I'll start with some from long ago. One day a year, I liked going to church. In late summer, we retreat to an outdoor sanctuary, the woods behind First Congregational. Two men build fires, spear whole salmon, laid flat, roast them over coals, coastal native style. Families offer bread and jello, cake and potato salad. Before the meal, kids grow wings on their keds and scatter down dirt paths. Some leap like stags through brush. We all ignore warnings to keep our clothing dry and hurtle into the creek. We are lords of crash and splash, skinned knees and palms, seekers of periwinkles among pebbles. Aside from the feast, no one in church talks about the Kalapuya. Later, I learned from a stone plaque, they named Mary's River and this valley Chepenefu, place of the elderberry. We clamber to picnic tables. Christ's fishes swim with Pacific salmon as church kids and I down cup after Dixie cup of red Kool-Aid, our first, my last communion. And this next one grew out of a memory of a place called Crescent Lake where my family used to go camping almost every summer. And this was kind of a tough memory. So I definitely have played with this poem a lot before deciding I'll read it. Microcosm. Baby toads spilled from under a log. With a stick, 6-year-old me smashed as fast as they hopped. When I told my mom what I'd done, she asked, why? With a look that turned me to monster toad, the wartiest ever. Since then, I've asked why. Same tone, same facial contortions. How could I explain awe and horror to enmeshed to a knot? How could I explain death meant nothing yet? Sometimes you learn at home and school to hunch your back against sticks, hit back, hide tenderness under logs. I sometimes tell people, you know, if you look at me and my parents, pretty educated, you know, and all that, I think people like could say, oh, coastal elites. And I'd say, oh, I beg to differ. And I will tell them about this relative of mine. My favorite aunt. Zita taught me to roll cigarettes in her mobile home. Lick your thumb so it will stick and let you lift a leaf of rolling paper from the packet. Feed it to the rollers of the hand-cranked machine on the kitchen table. Pinch tobacco strands from the pouch. Then the hardest part, to sprinkle it an even row along the length of zigzag. Don't make it fat as her dog Boozer in the middle, or let the ends stay skinny like his legs. Turn the crank to wrap the cylinder, release it, lick the long edge of the paper, press to seal. I was sometimes scared of her, gruff-voiced from unfiltered cigarettes, tough as tobacco stains. Her arms hugged me near to death. Oh, thank you for the thumbs up. Much appreciated. This next one also grew out of some childhood memories, has maybe a little bit of a different voice. Heritage. The foods of my people in boxes with cartoon fonts came from fluorescent gods, powders and desiccated vegetables to mix with water, ground up meat. The foods of my people traveled in cans to the bottom shelf, anonymous green-gray bits, aluminum flavored. The foods of my people arrived swaddled in plastic, pure of dirt. My favorite space food sticks, paper wrapped, stood at attention in their cylinder. We wanted to eat like astronauts. We wanted to escape the Earth. So I used to live in a small town in Oregon where I was born, about the size of St. Cloud, but imagine years ago. And when I was 7, my parents lost their minds and bought a 14-acre commercial hazelnut farm. And we moved to this aging farmhouse. And that's where I lived until I left for college. And then my parents lived there for several years later until it was too much work for them and they sold it. This is called Buying the Farm. My mother's whim while picking berries on a farm on Kiger Island was to buy our own 14 acres of snags. No city kids, my parents, between her childhood in Iowa, his summers in hop fields, they surely knew they'd secured a shaky vessel. Kristen cried, I pretended when they said we'd leave Elmwood Drive for Route 3. On wet winter days, the whole house hunched, dark with shadows. We baked so many snickerdoodles in the yellow kitchen. Frozen pipes, leaky faucets. We found our cat's kittens warming by the water heater. Pastel fragments of Easter eggs eaten by raccoons and skunks. Easter colors in my father's eyes as he posed on the tractor. So that poem ends with a reference to my father. That's a kind of a good transition to my last 3 poems. I lost my father in 2018, and I have to tell you, I used to call him Rasputin behind his back because he had been through so many health scares that I used to joke he'd outlive me. I wrote these 3 poems after his passing. Thin places. Heaven and earth overlap. You stand on an invisible bridge between 2 worlds loosely stitched. You know it in a breath when ordinary stones in Scotland sweep more magic through you than Stonehenge. Or years drag before you know you touched the hem of heaven. After his triple bypass, I asked my father to visit the wild bird refuge, where we walked between moss-dressed trees, where I held my breath, where I photographed him kneeling beneath a curved out branch, after which he lived 26 years longer. Hospice. I'd rather tame a bison bull than ask, is there anything you want to say before I leave? But I do. He stares ahead, eyes marbled. Not particularly. I want to peel off my skin, turn to smoke, ascend, but I stay. Massage his rusty hands until I have to chase a plane. Over the highway, rags and ashes reel, unfold into a current of crows. A sign on the bridge over the Clackamas chastises, undertow, rocks, cold shock, swim at your own risk. This is my last poem tonight. Some memories of the farmhouse here, and this actually was a dream that I had. The title is The Work, Dreaming of My Father. From room to room, we inspect the farmhouse as storms drape its faulty roof. A steady trickle rains down one corner in the first. Next, more persistent dripping. The third room, submerged in crisis, we wade through to our knees. What do we do while waiting for experts and equipment? Bail, he says, start bailing. With only the tools at hand, together we bend, scoop, pour kitchen bowls of raindrops out the window as thousands more bowls full flow inside. Do the work, say his motions. Even when you fight a flood, when your bowl overflows, the work, it is your wage. Thank you very much, everyone.
That was Janna Knittel. Richard Robbins was born in Los Angeles and grew up in Southern California and Montana. He has lived continuously in Minnesota since 1984. He's published 5 full-length books, as well as the recent Body Turned to Rain New and Selected Poems, which Lynx House Press released in May of 2017. Over the years, he's received awards and fellowships from the Loft, McKnight Foundation, the Minnesota State Arts Board, the Hawthornden and Castle International Retreat for Writers in Scotland, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the Poetry Society of America. From 1986 to 2014, Robbins directed the Good Thunder reading series at Minnesota State University, Mankato, where he continues to teach for about 4 more weeks. In 2006, he was awarded the K. Sexton Award for long-standing dedication and outstanding work in fostering books, reading, and literary activity in Minnesota. Richard Robbins.
Thanks, everybody, for coming. Thanks, Dick and Paul, for inviting me and making the technology work. I checked my records, and the last time that I was here, or with the Midstream series, my New and Selected had just come out. So I'm going to not read from that book at all. I'll give you the link to it in the chat if you're interested. And I want to read more recent poems that are part of a new manuscript that I have sent on its way to some editors. So we'll see what happens there. So I'll start with this poem called Wave. Every day and always, the stray pebble finds him, an eye looking up from the path to another's execution, the camouflaged jury of peers, beneath which the earth goes on with its thinking. How will he ever know the way around it? Eye looking out from a 900-year-old painting on granite, eye of salmon up from the depths of the glacial lake, eye of octopus and rat, eye of daisy, eye at the end of a sentence. On long drives across desert, the earth has its way with him. The wind and grit in his face, his neck turned to leather, the sun screams quietly, the large birds circle. Over the mountains, he smells the ocean again. The smell of a sun's head moments after birth, the basin spreads out 80 miles toward the sea, basin of 1,000,000 homes, 100,000 crimes of love or theft, acts of mercy, one at a time under a fog that will leave God blind for hours. Cars explode across the arteries, expanding in every direction. The salt settles on everything, living or dead. Every day and always, the wave that spins above him, a bright wash of turbulence, a prayer for the new life. He lets tide pull him from the sandy shore. He walks avenues of the great western city, nodding to strangers, casual with air, even as the undertow nags at his feet, even as persons on the beach will blur into the white of their own care. How will he ever know the daily way back to solid ground, to loved ones with their own rituals of renewal? How will he know the eye follows beyond him? Even the machinery of the world will find its way back from loss, even as it carries the grief of billions, even as the blood on its surface, blood of birth or blood of revolution, raises the flag of its shame and its reward. I've been writing a lot of poems for the last 5 years or so in collaboration with my friend Brian Frank, who's a painter. And what I mean by collaboration means he paints things and I write poems about them. And sometimes I write poems and he does paintings about them. It's never synchronous, but one of these days we'll sit out in his field in front of his house and do it simultaneously. The closest we did to doing that was when we took some students to South America and everybody was writing and painting at the same time. And so we want to do more of that. This poem is based on a painting of his called Island. Day and night we stopped what we were doing to find ourselves swimming toward it. It was God. It was the other we'd have to cross the great deep to love. We memorized its jagged back in the bottomless hour of night. Beyond the spine of tree crown and rock lay the line of a far-off range. Beyond that, the unhinging of stars. We heard its voice after a while, not God's, not the others, something any wind might say to a fox. It starts each morning with a surface chop, the same wind talking to blue. Year by year, these same red nets of routine. What happens to a city if we leave it? How does the wild place die in our hands? We ask you, great one, O lover. We are swimming over parables of weed and bass under the unstoried sky of day. We will praise you, moving in your direction. We will praise you, closing in on us, even in your delay. One more about water. This poem is named after the valley north of Los Angeles where the city found some of its water back at the beginning of the 1900s. It's called the Owens Valley, and you remember that figured in the great film Chinatown. The Owens Valley. My grandmother sent me to bed those nights. My grandmother sent me to bed those days at last light, leaving the dark to adults on the cabin's front porch. The sound of the creek made me sleep, but not before I counted its dozen voices over stone and pictured gnats bald in their ellipses like cartoon atoms over the royal. My grandmother sat for the first time all day. My mother smoked. My grandfather struggled in a metal chair to read the last good stories in the Los Angeles Times. No one flipped on the outdoor bulb because of the moths it drew. The last horsefly pecked and buzzed at the screen. The sound of the creek made them talk. Maybe like me, they heard their own voice in the water. Maybe like me, the water gave them words. All that conversation fed by snow from the eastern Sierra. In no time, even in that heat, the milk plumped alfalfa fields along the narrow road to Bishop. It filled the bellies of horses. They talked about time. I thought a lot of the one black widow under the floorboards waiting that week to find me, but before I slept, I mostly heard them talk about time. A Scottish city where his father was born, my grandmother's Idaho, my mother's life before children. All gone, they would sometimes say. Then they would start again. I don't know how much of this is dream. The creek made me sleep, the porch filled with story and dark. Then came the morning we drove back to LA, down the Owens Valley, its water stolen by the city, its lake turned to alkali flat, most farms gone bust. One desert edge, a sentry gate, all that was left of Manzanar. A dirt road, a sign pointing into the White Mountains, some brutal crest where bristlecone pines first began to live 2,000 years before me. As a young man, I was afraid of cities and of mountain passes. Both took my breath away. If I was driving, my arms would turn to stone across the steering wheel. Sometimes I would not be able to stop. Sometimes I would not be able to stop, as I can now, older, and tell myself, go ahead and die, which became, after a while, the words for a cure for my sickness, the thing that made me breathe again. All gone, they would sometimes say. Then they would start again, the creek still falling its thousands of feet out of the ice, into the lives of animals. Sorry for the freeze up. That's I have some sort of karmic debt I'm paying apparently. All my Zoom sessions, I freeze. As I said, I've taken some students with Brian to South America. An amazing trip. The rule if you signed up for the class was if you were an artist, you had to write, and if you were a writer, you had to try to paint. And so we did sort of touristy things in the morning, like we would go to one of Neruda's houses, or we'd go up the mountain to Machu Picchu. But then in the afternoon, we would just sit and paint and write. And so there's a couple of poems from that experience. This one is called Ollantaytambo, which is a city on the way to Machu Picchu if you're on the train from Cusco. And this is just a short little poem. Ollantaytambo. If our name for sky did not have God in it, what are we doing then? Leaning into embrace like sheaves of quinoa in a small field, or laying our bodies down like corn to dry, such harvest in the sun. This next one is based on a hilltop above Santiago, Chile. There's a huge statue of the Virgin Mary. And under her feet is a little chapel that's maybe only about 20 feet. It's a round chapel inside. Maybe it's only 20 or 25 feet in diameter. But the statue itself is, 100 feet high, maybe not 100, but it's huge. And then off to the side, there's this little devotional area where people leave pictures of loved ones and they say prayers for them. San Cristobal Hill. For the Immaculate Virgin, they leave a picture of the son she saved from a mystery fever. Infant of the daughter they thought lost to gangs, daughter steered home by the daily candle, grandmother made comfortable, even as her mind evades her, grandfather lifting a suitcase to his side. For the mother of all, they leave barrettes, necklaces, thin leather wristbands, holy cards, one plastic rose, an unfolded fan, red pencil, scapular of the beloved. They leave a white ribbon, pink band that used to hold her hair in place, finger puppet, handkerchief tied in a bow, pacifier, shoelace, sun visor the baby wore that day in the stroller. They leave a child's rosary, and a child's rosary, and a child's rosary. At the base of the statue of the Mother of All Mercies, no one knows which objects arrive here by grief and which by gratitude. A scapular needs to be worn to grant its promise. Where is the body it belongs to? The mother kissing her daughter. Is this before the surgery or the last photo before the surgery failed? No one is telling. Here below the left ankle of the Immaculate Virgin, in a hollow below her base, where any whisper will not escape, even to the rains now dousing the candles, rains that move east to become infinite snow along the infinite granite rope of the Cordillera. Time to unfreeze myself again. Now I'd like to read, I have 2 minutes left. Okay, that's cool. I want to read a couple of pandemic poems, or maybe just one. I'll just read one. This is called Love in the New Time. It was never about the masks or rubber gloves, yellow ER cloth against yellow cloth, all inside the bubble NASA filled once with pure air for astronauts returned from stars. It was about beauty facing destruction, and a lot of tongue, naked on a blanket spread across backyard grass, a summer night, 2 of us under a harrowing dark. Thank you.
That was Richard Robbins. Katrina Vendenberg, our last reader, is the author of 2 books of poems, Atlas and The Alphabet Not Unlike the World. She's a professor in the creative writing programs at Hamline University and lives in St. Paul with her family. She's currently working on a book of essays from which I think she's going to read tonight, Katrina Vendenberg.
Thanks so much. Thanks for coming, and thanks to Dick Terrill for inviting me to read in this wonderful series, which I love. And thanks to my fellow readers. It's an honor to read with you. I'll be reading tonight from an essay called Jam, which is part of a book I'm working on that's about the Como Conservatory. And I've cut a passage out of it to make it fit in my time frame. And tonight, I'd like to dedicate my reading to the memory of poet and naturalist and Red Dragonfly Press publisher Scott King, who died far too young of a heart attack last week. Like Paula, the cousin of my husband who's portrayed in the essay, Scott was a person who was delighted by life and learning, and like all of us, really did not fit into any neat box. Jam. Along with a knitted hat, Cousin Paula sent a jar of homemade jam each Christmas. The jam was apricot, or Rangpur lime marmalade made from fruit that grew on the trees in her California backyard. It was plum jam spiced with cinnamon and cloves, or pear steeped in vanilla. It was made from cherries she'd purchased from the market. Each year, when my husband and I opened the box, we exclaimed in appreciation. Then we set the jars, labeled in her precise script, on a shelf in our basement and forgot about them. Our last photo of Paula. Visiting us in Minnesota, she's standing in the doorway of our daughter's bedroom, along with my brother-in-law, Mike. A cousin's reunion. At this point, Paula thinks her cancer is in remission. It isn't. She's maybe 60 years old, with short, thick white hair, wearing cargo pants and a shirt from an outdoor clothier. Brisk is how she looks. Her mother and my husband's father were siblings, and Paula and Mike, standing there, looked so much like each of their dead parents that when I had come around the corner with the camera, I had been momentarily shocked. As a young man, my husband had emulated Paula. The summer between his junior and senior years of college, he camped in national parks all over the US while traveling on a Greyhound bus with a pass, the way she had done 10 years before. During that trip, he visited her in Sacramento, where she was working as an environmental lobbyist. He wrote her after, but she never wrote back. But then, when our daughter Anna was born 7 years ago, Paula reappeared. This time we were the busy people who did not always write back, but Paula remained constant. She knitted hats for Anna, each different from the last. With the first hat, she sent a small mesh laundry bag and neatly printed instructions on how to machine wash hand knits. Her early hats always seemed to turn our baby into food, or maybe a flower. Many had pom-poms. We saved them all. My favorite made Anna's baby head look like a strawberry flecked with seeds, a green scruff of stem on top. And then the jam, which was kind, but we only use jam for our daughter's sandwiches, and she will only eat one particular brand of strawberry. It isn't that I dislike jam, but I do find it spectacular in its uselessness. When canning came back in vogue and my friends were enchanted by the idea of saving Minnesota's summer in a jar, I balked. Jam lacks the healthfulness of actual fruit, and it's not substantial enough to be dessert. I'm not even sure it counts as food. Jam is the lace doily of food. Louis XIV loved jam. At the end of all his court dinners at Versailles, he served jellies and marmalades, mounted in little silver dishes and made year-round from the fruit grown in his palace's orangeries. Just imagine some of the richest people in the world in petticoats and powdered wigs, sighing and exclaiming as they eat jelly from tiny silver spoons. I am being unfair to history. 3 centuries ago, almost nobody could get fruit that did not grow near them, much less at a time of year that fruit didn't grow. Only the very richest people could afford the large panes of glass necessary to build an orangery, a conservatory where fruit trees in summer could exist in perpetuity. Sugar was imported and the equivalent of $50 a pound today. A little jam balanced on a spoon, sticky sweet, concentrated, fruit out of season, carried with it an intensity and a wallop we can barely comprehend. And really, other than fruit itself, the one ingredient you need to make jam is sugar. The necessary sugar to fruit ratio in jam is 1:1. The scientist Marie Curie, whose cookbooks are still so radioactive that archivists have them sealed in a lead-lined box, detailed as much in her notebooks. In the summer of 1898, when Curie first isolated the dangerously radioactive element polonium, she also made a batch of gooseberry jam. The jam, she wrote, required 8 pounds of fruit and 8 pounds of sugar, as any jam would. It's sugar that makes fruit gel. Sugar preserves. Sugar is an everyday miracle. It causes fruit to retain its bright color until it is brighter than it ever was on the tree. Heat and sugar alchemize to turn a jar of jam into a glowing jewel. Paula delighted in photos and videos and updates of our daughter, and we obliged. In return, she sent Anna dresses that were colorful, but not cloying. Paula sought out skirts that would spin out into a circle as Anna twirled. That was Paula's own ambition at Anna's age, she said, twirling. One dress was red and kimono inspired, another fuchsia with big turquoise flowers and a flounce, a third a trim and tailored meadow. She turned Anna's closet into a cornucopia of fruit and flowers. Apricot, raspberry, lingonberry, pineapple, strawberry, grape, orange. Jam is heightened fruit, idealized fruit. Paula could also be a little difficult. She had a habit of finishing your sentences for you, inserting something you hadn't planned to say at all. After a day or two of this, I'd stop trying to clarify what I meant and let her misconceptions stand. When she visited us, she was forever powering down our laptops and unplugging the chargers from the wall to save energy, or shrinking my t-shirts while drying them on the highest possible setting because it was fastest and would therefore use the least amount of electricity. A family legend claimed that a college-aged Paula cried about air pollution as the older World War II era generation grilled steaks at a family reunion, nursing highballs and rolling their eyes. A fellow environmentalist said at her funeral, Paula pissed people off, but usually for the right reasons. Paula knew this. Even as she lay dying, she limited the number of hours hospice would be allowed in her house. When her friends and even her doctor protested, she said, I live alone for a reason, guys. Down in our basement pantry yesterday, I noticed all of Paula's jars of jam tucked in one corner of a shelf, quietly luminous. If you asked Anna the best present Paula ever sent, she would say the Christmas that she sent the pop-up book of US national parks. The day we opened it, a 3-year-old Anna spent hours arranging her plastic zoo animals on top of the pages, as if Paula had really sent us a series of 3D landscapes on which we could make tableaus. It was as if all the continents were once again Pangea, and time and space had ceased to exist. Let there be zebras near the geysers of Yellowstone. May gorillas walk the swamps of the Everglades. Blessed be the tigers of the Grand Canyon. Now Paula's life can be seen as a whole, its sweetness concentrated. She had recently retired from her work as a lobbyist for the Sierra Club. Deeply Catholic, she worshipped at a monastery with a small group of Benedictine monks. She was a genius of small talk, a quick thinker with a clear, precise voice. Probably she was a good lobbyist. If she had ever been in love or had a lover, none of us knew. I can't believe that this is all I know to tell. Because she did so much of the talking, I'm surprised now she told me so little. If someone doesn't have kids, what happens to the ancestors Anna asks me over a bedtime snack of buttered toast. This is where I skip a passage. When Paula's friends asked her whether she wanted any words said at her funeral, she waved them off, saying that picking out readings is a living person's problem. Finally, she offered this from John the Evangelist. No one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God lives in us, and God's love is made complete in us. We still talk about Paula's small kindnesses, the little gifts she sent through the mail to Anna. In fact, now that Paula is dead, I feel an intimacy with her that I didn't previously, one of the many oddities of death, and I will never get to talk with her about it. Soon after Paula died, we were contacted by her lawyer. She left, 1, to John, a Victorian set of cut glass liqueur glasses and a matching pitcher that had belonged to their grandmother. 2, to our daughter Anna, that same grandmother's wedding ring, and a lump of money so generous that I dropped the lawyer's letter in shock. Aside about that cut glass, it took us over an hour to liberate each stemmed glass from the enormous amount of packing tape, bubble wrap, and newspaper in the cardboard box. Water glass, wine glass, water, water, wine. We don't care for fussy crystal, and we were certain it would sit forever on a shelf, taking up space and gathering dust. Even that turned out to be different from what we expected. The set looked exactly like the set of cut glass my husband's father had inherited from his parents, as if my husband's father and Paula's mother would have inherited identical portions of a single larger set. My father-in-law's set no longer exists. It had been shattered one afternoon when he was very old, when the woman who cleaned his house accidentally pulled over the hutch on which he displayed it. My father-in-law was kind to the woman, but after she left, he cried. Now, 20 years later, a nearly identical glass collection had appeared, it seemed, out of nowhere. The crystal doesn't have to gather dust. The jam doesn't have to be Anna's favorite flavor. We do have to eat the jam, unseal the jars, and unstop time to say hello to Paula, wherever she may be. Here's how I imagine it. Some weekend later in the fall, when the yellow leaves are falling from the ash tree outside our kitchen window, we buy a delicious loaf of bread. We slice it, toast it, and serve it with Paula's jam. We invite our friends and neighbors, fill the fussy glasses. We didn't say it would be potluck, but people keep showing up with food anyway, unpacking brown grocery bags, handing over covered dishes wrapped in kitchen towels. Later in the afternoon, the kitchen gets crowded with people laughing. The floor sticky where something had spilled. A glass breaks, and we reassure the breaker as we sweep up the fragments. Our dead relatives show up. There's Paula's parents on their first blind date on New Year's Eve in 1945. There's my husband's parents, the grandparents my daughter never knew, but young again and energetic looking. And my great-grandmother, who worked in the vineyards in Alsace-Lorraine, and further back and further back. By this time, it's dark outside, with the windows turned to mirrors, and we think we only see our own reflections. We drink to memory, love made complete and whole as we devour it. Thank you. And also you got a surprise appearance by Anna at the beginning, when during an earlier reading, so thanks.
That was Katrina Vendenberg. Well, thanks again for joining us. There were about 6 people in the waiting room at 7:29, so we're very glad that so many people rushed in at 7:30 or maybe 7:31. Next month's Midstream will be Thursday, May 13th. The host will be Don Brunkwell, and the readers will be Jim Seiler, Michael Keesaw Moore, Rachel Frazen, and Lisa Higgs. Now, please join me in one more round of Zoom applause for tonight's readers, followed by a chance for you to react, discuss, ask questions, unmuted, without a net, greet your friends, or otherwise misbehave. So, Steve Healey, Janna Knittel, Richard Robbins, Katrina Vendenberg.